My name is Lauren Mercer. I'm 32 years old, and I almost married a man who was far more in love with my bank account than he ever was with me. If you ran into me now, you'd probably only clock the surface details. Steel-toe boots, hair pulled into a no-nonsense ponytail, sliding out from under a breaker panel with a multimeter in one hand while my phone vibrates nonstop with contractor calls in the other. I'm a licensed master electrician, and I own my own electrical contracting company. Not the change a light bulb, hang a ceiling fan kind of work. I'm talking full residential rewires, commercial tenant improvements, service upgrades, backup generators, the whole messy, heavy-duty package. I didn't come from money. I came from scraped knuckles, early mornings, and second-hand work boots that never quite fit right. Straight out of trade school, I spent 3 years as a journeyman, saying yes to every overtime shift anyone offered. I lived in a dingy studio that permanently smelled like stale cigarettes someone else had smoked years before I got there. I ate chicken and rice meal prep so often I could have listed the macros from memory. Every extra dollar went straight into a savings account I treated like it didn't exist. My dad drilled 2 lessons into me before I even hit adulthood. First, in the trades, the real money isn't in working for someone else forever. It's in owning the business. Second, never get married without protecting what you've built. Ever. I watched him lose the house, half his retirement, and 3 years of spousal support after his divorce from my mom. And no, she wasn't some helpless victim. She was a nurse with a solid income. But the court doesn't care who sacrificed nights and weekends to build something. It just splits what shows up on paper. That stuck with me, so at 25, I finally took the leap. I borrowed 10 grand from my dad, bought a beat-up work van that smelled like oil and regret, got my contractor's license, and slapped magnetic signs with my brand new company name on the doors. In the beginning, I was everything. Estimator, scheduler, technician, bookkeeper, and sometimes the one mopping the shop floor. 14-hour days, 6 days a week. Sundays were my version of rest, which meant only working 8 hours. The first year was brutal. I slept with my phone volume cranked all the way up because missing a call wasn't an option. I underbid bigger companies because my overhead was low, and I worked faster than crews where 3 guys leaned on ladders scrolling their phones while one actually did the job. But I showed up. I didn't cut corners. Every job passed inspection the first time. In the trades, reliability is basically a superpower. Word spread. Year 2, I hired my first employee. Year 3, I had 4. Now I've got 8 employees, 3 vans, and a 2,500 square foot shop I own outright. My accounts are solid, my retirement isn't depressing, and 4 years ago I bought myself a modest 3-bedroom house in cash and dumped 60 grand worth of sweat, sawdust, and late nights into renovating it. I'm not rich, but I'm comfortable, and I'm proud because no one handed this to me, which is exactly why what came next hurt as much as it did. I met Ethan 3 years ago at a friend's barbecue. He was a friend of a friend, the guy who showed up with potato salad he admitted he'd bought at the deli and transferred into his own bowl so it looked homemade. He was 29, worked as an administrative coordinator at a medical office, made decent money, and had this laid-back charm. Dark hair, an easy smile, a soft laugh, and a way of leaning in when I talked that made me feel like the rest of the backyard faded out. When he asked what I did and I said I was an electrician, he grinned and said, "Like you actually crawl through attics and mess with live wires?" When I said yes, he laughed and told me that was insanely attractive. It felt good to be admired for what I did, not just how I looked. The first year was easy. Hiking trails, movie nights, lazy Sunday breakfasts at my place. He'd bring me lunch at job sites sometimes, show up with iced coffee when I was clearly running on fumes. He never made a big deal about my income or my business. He seemed genuinely interested in me. Looking back, that was the first illusion. By the second year, things got more serious. He stayed over most nights. I gave him a key. His toothbrush lived in my bathroom, his hoodies slowly took over my closet, but he still had his own apartment and paid his own bills. I liked that independence. I covered more dinners and weekend trips, but he never outright asked me for money. That should have tipped me off. He was patient. Around the 2-year mark, I proposed. Yeah, I proposed to him. I know some people still find that strange, but it felt right at the time. I took him to the coast for a weekend, rented a small cabin, walked us down to the beach at sunset, and pulled out a ring I thought he'd love the clean, simple design. He cried. He said yes. I remember thinking I'd finally found my person. He moved into my house a month later, gave up his apartment, and that's when things started shifting, quietly at first, like someone nudging the thermostat 1 degree higher at a time. He began commenting on the house. Once we're married, we should redo the kitchen, open it up, waterfall countertops, upgrade the master bath, steam shower, soaking tub. We could finance it easily. This extra bedroom would be perfect as a shared walk-in closet. I kept saying, sure, someday, not a priority right now. He'd sulk briefly, then let it go. Then, wedding planning started. He wanted a big venue, destination rehearsal dinner, videographer, flower walls, Pinterest boards multiplying like roaches. I told him I was happy to pay for a nice wedding, but I wanted to keep it reasonable. He agreed every time, and somehow the budget crept higher with every conversation. 3 months after the proposal, he quit his job. He sat at the kitchen table, twisting his mug like it might give him courage. He said he hated his job and that planning the wedding was basically a full-time commitment. What if he quit and focused on that, and after we were married, he'd figure out what he really wanted to do long-term? Every instinct I had screamed bad idea, but I was exhausted. Running jobs, managing people, dealing with permits. The thought of coming home to an argument made my stomach knot. So I swallowed it and told him we could make it work for a while. He fully moved into my house. I covered everything. Even without a mortgage, there were taxes, utilities, insurance, groceries. He claimed he had savings for personal expenses, but his lifestyle shifted fast. Lunches out with friends multiple times a week, shopping bags appeared. Then my credit card showed a $600 charge from a boutique. When I asked, he laughed and said he must have grabbed my card by accident and promised to pay me back. He never did. I let it slide. That was mistake number 1. The second red flag was how he talked about my work. At first, he bragged about me. My fiancé runs her own company, he'd say, and I'd roll my eyes but feel proud. After he moved in, the tone changed. You're always working. Do you really have to check that job site today? It'd be nice if you took a day off once in a while. We're getting married, remember? I explained over and over that 8 employees depended on me, that clients didn't care about date nights, that this was what ownership looked like. He'd nod and say he understood, but the resentment lingered, humming under everything. My best friend Danny, a welder who started his own fabrication shop around the same time I launched my company, said what he'd been thinking. Over sandwiches one afternoon, he told me something felt off. That Ethan quit his job to plan a wedding I was paying for while spending money like it grew on breaker panels. I got defensive. Danny told me to just keep my eyes open and not let love turn me into a walking checkbook. His words stuck. So when my lawyer friend Eric sat me down and said we needed to talk about a prenup, I already felt that small knot in my stomach. Eric laid it out plainly. I had significant premarital assets: house, business, equipment, cash reserves. Without a prenup, Ethan could be entitled to half the appreciation. Worse, if he claimed he contributed to the business, he could come after part of it. That didn't just affect me, it affected my employees. My dad's voice echoed in my head. Protect what you build. I told Eric to draft it. The terms were fair. What I owned before stayed mine. What he owned stayed his. Anything we build together would be split evenly. The house and the business protected. I told myself it wasn't about expecting failure, it was about being responsible. What I didn't understand yet was that for Ethan, it meant something else entirely. I chose pasta for the prenup conversation on purpose. Comfort food, familiar. something that smelled like home, not legal paperwork. I boiled the water, stirred the penne, tossed together garlic and olive oil while my heart hammered against my ribs. Ethan sat 10 feet away, scrolling on his phone, feet up on my coffee table like everything was fine. I plated the food, took a breath, and sat down, the folder resting beside my plate. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice light, "there's something we should go over." He smiled. "That sounds ominous." I told him my lawyer had drawn up a prenup, standard stuff, just protecting what we each brought into the relationship. The silence stretched, broken only by the fridge humming and the clock ticking. "A prenup?" he repeated. I slid the folder toward him. "Yeah, given that I own the business and the house, it makes sense. It protects both of us. What's mine before we say I do stays mine. What's yours stays yours, and anything we build together is split fairly." His face shifted. It was almost fascinating watching the emotions slide across it. Confusion, then hurt, then something sharper. "You want me to sign a prenup?" he said slowly. 6 weeks before our wedding? "I want us both to be smart," I said. "I've watched what happens when people don't plan for this stuff. You can have a lawyer look it over. I'll pay for that. If something feels unfair, we'll adjust it." "So your dad gets screwed over in his divorce, and now every woman in your life gets treated like a potential thief." He laughed once, humorless. "Good to know." Heat crawled up my neck. "That's not what this is it?" He shoved his plate away untouched. "You're telling me you don't trust me, that you think I'm here for your money?" "I'm telling you, I've worked my ass off," I said, my voice dropping. "I own a house and a company before this marriage. You didn't build those things with me. Why should losing them be even a theoretical possibility?" He stood up so fast his chair scraped the tile. "Because we're supposed to be a team, Lauren. My parents didn't have a prenup. They built everything together." "Your parents also started from the same financial place," I shot back. "Your dad didn't bring in a paid-off house and a business with 8 employees, while your mom brought what, exactly?" The words hung there, heavier than I meant them to. His jaw clenched. "Wow. Okay, so that's what you really think of me." I exhaled, pinching the bridge of my nose. "That's not Ethan. Please read it, sit with it, talk to a lawyer. We don't have to decide tonight." He grabbed the folder, knuckles white. "Fine, I'll look at your paperwork." He didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. I told myself he just needed time, that anyone would be surprised, that this was a grown-up conversation for a grown-up relationship and we were both allowed to have feelings about it. But for the next week and a half, he avoided the topic completely. Every time I gently asked, "Have you had a chance to review it?" he changed the subject. Meanwhile, the deadline for our final venue payment crept closer, $15,000 non-refundable dollars. I'd already put $5,000 down as a deposit. The venue was gorgeous, sure, but if he refused to sign, there wasn't going to be a wedding to host there. The night before the payment was due, I tried one last time. We were sitting at the table again, this time with takeout containers between us. I pushed a forkful of cold pad thai around in the box, then set it down. "I need to make the venue payment tomorrow," I said quietly. "Have you had a chance to review the prenup? Are there any changes you want to talk through?" He set his chopsticks down and looked me dead in the face. "I'm not signing it." The world went very still. "Okay," I said carefully. "Can you tell me what your concerns are? Eric can adjust." "My concern," he cut in, voice sharpening, "is that the document exists at all. It's insulting. It means you don't see us as partners. You see me as a liability, a risk to your assets." "It means I'm protecting a house and a business I built long before you moved in," I said. "Anything we get together after we're married, that's shared. That's fair." He crossed his arms, expression closing. "No, what's fair is trusting me. My parents," I held up a hand, "your parents didn't go through what my dad did, and they didn't sit you down at 18 and tell you never get married without protecting what you've built. Mine did." Ethan stared at me for a long, taut moment. Then he said the words that snapped everything into focus. "Then you have to choose, Lauren. Me or that piece of paper. You can't have both." In that instant, something inside me went very, very quiet. It was like a switch flipped. All the little red flags, Him quitting his job, the spending, the digs at my work hours, the nonstop pressure for a bigger, flashier wedding, the way he talked about my house as our asset to upgrade, lined up like dots in a connect the dots drawing, and the picture looked an awful lot like, "I want access to your money with no guardrails." I felt this eerie calm settle over me. I looked at him and said, "I understand." A small smile tugged at his lips. "Good. I'm glad we can move past this and focus on the wedding." I nodded, stood up, and walked into my home office. I closed the door. My hands were steady as I picked up the phone. First call, the venue. I canceled knowing I was eating the $5,000 deposit, but refusing to drop 20 grand on a party for a marriage already showing me its cracks. Next, caterer, photographer, florist, DJ. One after another, I canceled. Some deposits were gone, some refunded. Total damage, about $8,500 in sunk costs. Then I drafted a simple post for the wedding website and the private event page we'd set up on social media. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the wedding of Lauren Mercer and Ethan Parker, scheduled for October 12, 2023, has been canceled. I apologize for any inconvenience this causes our guests. I wish Ethan all the best. I hit post. Finally, I threw a few sets of clothes into an overnight bag, grabbed my grandfather's Omega Seamaster watch from the dresser, just a habit, really, like carrying a talisman, and headed for the door. Ethan was still at the table, scrolling on his phone, completely unaware that the scaffolding of his future was collapsing behind him. "Where are you going?" he asked, frowning. "Out," I said. It was the most honest answer I had. I checked into a hotel 20 minutes away, turned my phone off, and fell into the best sleep I'd had in months. The next morning, my phone lit up like a slot machine when I powered it back on. Dozens of missed calls, over 100 texts, notifications stacked from friends, from his family, from people whose names I barely recognized. I was halfway through my hotel breakfast when the room phone rang. "Ms. Mercer?" the front desk clerk said, voice tight. "There's a gentleman in the lobby asking for you. He says he's Richard Parker, your fiancé's father. He's insisting on speaking with you. Should we call security?" "Perfect. Tell him I'll be down in a few minutes," I said. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I smiled. I didn't rush. I finished my coffee, wiped my mouth with a napkin, and took my time riding the elevator down. If Richard Parker wanted a scene, he could simmer a while. The lobby was quiet. Soft hotel jazz playing under the murmur of guests checking out. Richard stood near the front desk, pacing like a caged lion in an expensive suit, red-faced, jaw clenched. The moment he saw me, he stalked over. "You embarrassed my son," he snapped, loud enough that two people by the fireplace turned to stare. "You humiliated him. You humiliated our entire family." I folded my arms, keeping my voice calm and low. "Ethan made a choice. I responded to it." "A choice?" he scoffed. "You ambushed him with a legal document 2 weeks before the wedding, treated him like some criminal, then canceled everything publicly without even discussing it with us." I felt my spine straighten at us. "He had 2 weeks," I said. "He refused to engage. He gave me an ultimatum instead. There's not a lot to discuss after that." Richard stepped closer, dropping his voice. "You will fix this. Call the vendors, rebook the venue. Tell everyone you panicked, got cold feet, whatever excuse you need. You're young. People will understand." "The relationship is over, Richard," I said. "There's nothing to fix." He smiled then, but there was nothing kind in it. "You don't want to make an enemy of me, Ms. Mercer. I have a lot of influence in this town. You're a small business owner. You rely on people's goodwill. Think very carefully." Fear flickered somewhere in my chest. Then another voice rose up in me, my own this time. "You already survived scraping by on instant coffee and overtime. You'll survive this too." I met his gaze. "Have a good day, Richard." I walked past him out into the parking lot, hands shaking only a little. Later that afternoon, I called Eric and told him everything. He didn't sound surprised. "First things first," he said. "We set a boundary on the living situation. Since Ethan wasn't on the deed and we weren't married, he was legally speaking a tenant with no lease. State law required 30 days' notice to vacate. Eric drafted the letter that day and emailed it to Ethan with me CC'd. It was polite, almost painfully so. Per state tenancy laws, you have 30 days to vacate the property at address. Please arrange for movers and remove all belongings by date. Any items remaining after that date will be considered abandoned. The letter included a list of the possessions Ethan had brought into the house: furniture, clothes, electronics. I'd spent an hour walking through each room, mentally separating his from mine and checking it with old photos and receipts. Anything I cared about, particularly sentimental items like my grandfather's watch, was clearly documented as pre-relationship property. His response came a couple of hours later, not via email, but voicemail. "Lauren," he sobbed, "I can't believe you're kicking me out like this. I have nowhere to go. I'm too devastated to even think about packing. How can you be so heartless? I thought you loved me. Please, can we just talk? I'll sign the prenup if that's what you want. Just don't do this." Listening to it, I felt nothing. Not because I was cruel, because by then I'd seen exactly when his priorities shifted. Not when I heard him, but when he lost access. Too little, too late, I thought, forwarding the voicemail to Eric for documentation. The next 2 weeks were ugly. Ethan launched a full-scale pity tour across social media. Vague, sad posts. Sometimes the person you thought you knew becomes a stranger, and healing from betrayal is the hardest thing I've ever done. Mutual friends started messaging me. "Hey, is everything okay? Ethan says you just snapped. Are you sure you're not overreacting? He seemed so in love." To the ones who actually knew me, I told the truth in simple terms. I asked for a fair prenup. He refused and gave me an ultimatum. I chose to protect what I've built. Some understood, a few didn't. I mentally sorted people into piles, keep and cut loose. If that had been the end of it, I might have eventually chalked it up to a painful lesson in ignoring red flags. But Richard hadn't finished with me. About a week after the hotel confrontation, my account rep at one of my key suppliers called. "Lauren, I'm really sorry," he said. "Corporate is tightening credit lines due to market volatility. We're going to have to reduce yours." My payment history with them was spotless. I never carried a late balance. "Is there a problem with my account?" I asked. No, nothing specific. It's across the board, just policy." It wasn't. A few days after that, a property management company I did steady commercial work for put a big upcoming project on hold. When I pressed the project manager, he shifted uncomfortably. "Look, we've just heard some things," he said. "Rumors about instability with your company." Instability? Market volatility? Vague concerns? None of it was concrete enough to fight. All of it was enough to hurt. It didn't take a conspiracy theorist to connect the dots. Powerful, vindictive developer, lots of business connections, a bruised ego over his golden son being dumped. I called Danny that night and laid it all out. He listened, then said quietly, "Okay, so he wants to play dirty without leaving fingerprints. Fine. You can't go at him head on. He'll bury you in legal nonsense. You need to find his weak spot. Something true, something you can expose without it pointing straight back to you." "What if there isn't one?" I asked. Danny snorted. "Guys like that always have one. Their entire personality is leverage." So I started digging. I spent my evenings not on Netflix, but on public records websites and court filing databases. I looked up Richard's development company. I read every news article, every puff piece about him sitting on charity boards and supporting the community. Buried in the small claims court records, I found the first crack. One lawsuit, filed 2 years ago, a small electrician suing Richard's company for non-payment on a commercial job. Amount, around $8,500. I almost laughed at the irony. Then another case, this time a landscaping company. Then a painter, a plumber, a flooring company. 6 small contractors in 3 years. Same pattern over and over. They did the work. Richard's company withheld the final payment. They filed in small claims for amounts between $5,000 and $12,000. Just big enough to hurt a little business, just small enough to make hiring a lawyer not worth it. In most cases, he either settled for less midway through or dragged things out until they were desperate enough to accept partial payment. It wasn't technically illegal, but it was a strategy, a calculated way to bleed small businesses so his margins looked better. I cross-referenced the court cases with online reviews. A couple of the contractors had left bitter, detailed comments on industry review sites, warning others about working with his company. My anger cooled into something harder, sharper. He was willing to quietly threaten my livelihood to protect his son's ego, and he'd been bleeding other small businesses dry for years. Fine. I opened a new document and started compiling everything. Case numbers, company names, dates, amounts, screenshots of reviews, line after line of receipts. Somewhere between copying the 4th and 5th case summary, a thought slid into my mind and settled there comfortably. If he wants to play in the shadows, I'll turn on the lights. The plan that finally formed in my head was simple. Not clean, not neat, but simple. I wasn't going to sue Richard. I wasn't going to march into his office and scream. That's the kind of drama he'd be ready for. Fights he could drag into court, tie up for years, outspend me on. Instead, I was going to hand the truth to people who had a bigger microphone than I did, and no reason to protect him. There was one contractor in those small claims records whose name I recognized, Sparkline Electrical. They had a rock-solid reputation in town, good reviews. I'd seen their owner, Marcos, at networking events. We weren't close, but we'd swapped cards and we should grab coffee sometime. Pleasantries. 2 years ago, Sparkline sued Richard's company for $8,500 in unpaid work. They'd ended up settling for $6,000 after months of nonsense. If anyone had a bone to pick, it was them. I drafted a letter, not an email, a physical letter, printed at a FedEx business center in the next town over, paid for in cash, no digital trail. In it, I laid out what I'd found, the 6 small claims cases against Richard's company, the pattern of non-payment to small contractors, the case numbers and dates. I attached copies of public records and screenshots of online reviews. Then I wrote one question at the end. How many other small businesses has he done this to? I didn't sign it. I didn't hint at who I was. All I did was nudge. A week passed. 2. Life went on in that warped, tense way it does when you're waiting for a bomb you're not sure you armed correctly. Ethan's 30-day move-out deadline was creeping closer. I saw less of him around the house. He tended to be out with friends or at his parents' place if his Instagram stories were to be believed. When he was home, he drifted through the rooms like a sad ghost, sighing dramatically whenever he thought I might be listening. I wasn't. I threw myself into work. I tightened our internal processes, checked in with every client personally, and quietly reassured my crew that we were steady no matter what whispers were making the rounds. Then, 3 weeks after I mailed that packet, Danny texted me a link on a random Tuesday afternoon. "You might want to sit down for this," he wrote. The link was to a local business journal article. Headline: Local developer accused of pattern of non-payment to small contractors. My pulse jumped. The piece was thorough. The journalist had clearly talked to Sparkline's owner, who'd then looped in the other contractors. They'd all gone on record. The article laid out the court cases, quoted filing numbers, described in painful detail how Richard's company had withheld final payments and dragged things through small claims. Richard's company had provided a bland statement about routine disputes and their commitment to fair resolutions. It sounded exactly like the non-apology it was, but the damage was done. In a tight-knit business community, being labeled the guy who screws small contractors is like getting a tattoo on your forehead. You can't hide it, and people talk. Within days, the story was picked up by a couple of local news sites. An industry blog did a short write-up about ethics and development, featuring Richard as a cautionary tale. 2 weeks after that, one of the charities Richard sat on the board of gratefully accepted his resignation. Translation: he'd been told to step down or be pushed. Then a rumor floated back to me from a friend of a friend in commercial real estate. A major investor had pulled out of one of Richard's upcoming development projects, citing the PR mess. The same week that news hit my ears, my supplier quietly reinstated my previous credit line. "Corporate review," my rep said breezily. "Looks like your account is solid as ever." The property management company that had hit pause on my project emailed about a new job like nothing had happened. It was like watching a tide turn. The whispers about me dried up as people found juicier gossip. The whispers about him got louder. I didn't celebrate, at least not publicly, but that night, sitting on my back porch with a beer, I looked at the stars and thought, "You should have just left me alone, Richard." The 30 days finally ran out. Move-out day fell on a gray, overcast Saturday. The house felt like it was holding its breath. I wasn't there, not because I was afraid of Ethan, but because I knew how the script would go if I stayed. Tears, begging, maybe some last-minute attempt to twist the story so I'd walk away feeling like the villain. I was done playing that role. Instead, Danny and his dad, retired attorney, unflappably calm, came over to supervise. I handed him a printed inventory list, what was Ethan's, what was mine, backed with photos and receipts for any high-value items. Most of it was straightforward: his clothes, his gaming console, the dresser he'd brought from his old apartment, some dishes, a bookshelf. The only major point of contention, according to Danny's later recap, was my grandfather's watch. It's a 1960s Omega Seamaster my grandfather wore almost every day of his life. After he passed, my dad gave it to me. I had it restored 5 years ago, cleaned, serviced, new crystal. Cost me $1,200, and I kept the receipt tucked in a folder with a photo of my grandpa wearing it in 1973. On the inventory, I'd listed it clearly under Lauren's premarital property. Ethan knew what it meant to me. I'd let him wear it once to a formal event because he'd admired it. Apparently, he'd decided that one night on his wrist meant ownership. He showed up with his mom and a moving truck. Danny told me later he had a spreadsheet printed out listing all his belongings. At the bottom in bold, it said, "Grandfather's watch." Danny's dad handled it like a pro. Ethan, he said. Lauren's position is that this is a family heirloom, in her family for decades. It is not part of any shared property. We have documentation of this. Photos predating your relationship, the restoration receipt in her name. If you wish to dispute it, your option is to file a claim in small claims court. Ethan's mom chimed in. He gave it to Ethan as an engagement gift. It was supposed to be a new family heirloom. Danny's dad repeated, steady as a metronome. Our documentation says otherwise. According to Danny, Ethan lost it. He started yelling that I was vindictive, that I was taking everything, that I'd ruined his life, and the least I could do was let him keep the watch. Danny just leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, and said, "Man, you're walking out with the stuff you actually own. That's more than some people get." In the end, they loaded his real belongings onto the truck. The watch stayed. Before he left, Ethan turned in the doorway and hissed, "Tell Lauren she's not going to get away with this." Danny raised an eyebrow. Get away with what? Protecting her own property? Kicking out a guy who tried to ultimatum his way into half her life's work? Ethan didn't answer. He just walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. When I came home that evening, the house was quieter than it had been in months. No extra shoes in the hallway, no hoodies on the back of chairs, no faint cloud of his cologne hanging in the closet. Just my space, my things, my life. I went to my bedroom, opened the drawer where I kept my grandfather's watch, and held it in my palm. "Still mine," I whispered. For the first time since all of this began, I allowed myself to feel not just relief, not just grim satisfaction, but something like peace. 6 months later, I barely recognized the woman who'd stood in that kitchen clutching a folder and hoping her fiancé would choose her and the prenup. Not because I'd changed into someone harder exactly, but because I'd finally learned to believe myself when something felt wrong. On paper, the updates were straightforward. Richard's reputation never quite recovered. His company didn't collapse overnight. That's not how these things work. But the shine was gone. He lost another investor for that big project, and the timeline quietly stretched from breaking ground next quarter to under review. The Business Journal article about his contractor practices started getting cited in think pieces about ethics and development. He became a cautionary tale, which I'll admit I found poetic. Ethan's wife slipped into a slow downward spiral. The guy he dated after me, because yes, he did exactly what he accused me of doing and moved on fast, dumped him after a few months. Word filtered back that Ethan had been talking to someone else on the side. Patterns don't vanish just because the partner does. Eventually, he moved back in with his parents. I can't imagine how that's going, living under the same roof as a father who's furious and likely blaming everyone but himself, and a mother caught in the crossfire. Ethan's social media, once a steady stream of aesthetic brunches and wedding prep posts, dwindled to nothing. No more vague, sad quotes, just silence. Honestly, I wish him healing. I just don't wish to be anywhere near it. On my side of the fence, things bloomed. My company had its best year on record. Revenue climbed almost 24% from the previous year. We landed a contract with a national retail chain to handle electrical work for their store renovations across 3 states. That one contract alone is worth more than my first 2 years of business combined. I bought a small commercial building, not far from downtown. A brick rectangle with ugly fluorescent lights and gorgeous potential. We're renovating it to become our new shop. Once we move, I'll rent out my current space for extra income. My crew is solid. My supplier relationships are back to normal. Clients who'd once hesitated are now referring me to friends, saying things like, "She's tough, but she's fair. She does things by the book." They mean it as a compliment. I take it as one. Some evenings when the day's noise settles, I think back to that night at the dinner table, to Ethan's face when he said, "Me or that piece of paper." How easy it would have been in that moment to cave, to tell myself it was just a document, that love was more important than legal language, to ignore the sick little twist in my gut that whispered, if he loved you, he wouldn't be threatened by fairness. If I'd chosen him over the prenup, I'd have walked into a marriage with both eyes closed and both hands empty. Instead, I chose myself, my work, the years of busted knuckles and instant coffee and canceled weekends with friends because someone's service panel was sparking. I don't feel guilty about that. Not anymore. Sometimes people say, "Isn't a prenup kind of unromantic?" Here's what I tell them. There is nothing romantic about pretending money doesn't exist. There is nothing romantic about leaving yourself legally defenseless in the hope that someone who benefits from that power imbalance will never exploit it. And there is definitely nothing romantic about a partner who would rather watch you burn down your life's work than sign a fair agreement. My dad's old advice rings in my ears sometimes. Never get married without protecting what you've built. Never trust someone who wants access to your money more than they want to build something with you. For a long time, I thought he made him cynical. Now, I think it just made him honest. If there's a moral to all of this, it isn't never fall in love or never give anyone a chance. It's simpler. Pay attention to the red flags. Believe them the first time. If someone is offended by you protecting yourself, that's not love being insulted. That's entitlement losing leverage. These days, when I tell this story, people sometimes ask, do you regret it? The canceled wedding, the money lost on deposits, all the drama? I think about $8,000 in deposits versus a lifetime tethered to someone who saw me as his exit ramp from adulthood. It's the easiest math I've ever done. So no, I don't regret it. I walk into my new building, hear my crew laughing over some inside joke as they unload gear, feel my grandfather's watch warm against my wrist, and know deep in my bones I didn't lose anything that mattered. I just made room.